There are 10 spiritual superpowers of those who are comfortable being alone. The first one is discernment. When you spend real time alone, you start hearing what's not being said. You sense motives, you feel energy shifts, you recognize when something's off before words confirm it. That's not paranoia. That's spiritual clarity born in silence. Isolation sharpens your hearing, not for gossip, but for truth. The number two is emotional dependence. People comfortable being alone stop outsourcing peace. They don't need constant reassurance because they've met the source within. When your emotions no longer depends on who calls, who texts, or validates you, you've stepped into mastery, and peace then becomes your portal. When I go further, when you with emotional independence, when you've sat with yourself long enough, you don't need constant reassurance because peace stops depending on people. It starts flowing from presence. You stop chasing validation and start valuing stillness. You recognize and realize love doesn't prove itself through attention, it proves itself through consistency. Solitude teaches you how to self regulate, how to return to peace without a rescuer, because that's emotional wealth. Number three, an unshakable identity. In solitude, you stop performing. You stop trying to be what pleases others and start becoming who God created you to be. There's no mask left when no one's watching. You find that the you that existed before pain taught you to hide. That's why people who walk through solitude carry presence. They're real. They're no longer, they no longer fear rejection because they've met themselves and they finally said that I'm enough. Because people, hmm, solitude removes the audience. And when there's no one left to perform for, your real self walks out. Those who face themselves stop asking permission to exist. They know who they are without introduction, and no rejection can erase that. Number four is energetic protection. When you learn to be alone, your spirit starts filtering energy. You stop absorbing other people's chaos because your peace has standards now. Your solitude becomes a sacred firewall, and nothing gets in without alignment. Your spirit becomes a filter. You stop letting every energy into your space. Your peace becomes a gate, not a revolving door. Solitude teaches you that access is sacred. Not everyone should be allowed to sit in your silence. You stop absorbing chaos because you know how long it took to build calm. That's power. Spiritual boundaries formed through time alone. Number five, heightened intuition. When you quiet the mind, the spirit gets loud. You begin to sense what's coming before it arrives. That's God whispering through instinct, guiding you through what logic can't predict. Solitude sharpens that connection. You stop needing confirmation from people. Your peace becomes your yes. Your unease becomes your no. That divine intuition and it grows in silence. Excuse me. Alone time quiets the noise of the world. And in that quiet, you start hearing divine instruction. You start catching spiritual signals, subtle, powerful, but undeniable. The ones who can sit in silence often walk guided by whispers most people miss. Number six, self healing. Aloneness reveals what's wounded, but it also shows you how to heal. It forces you to face the parts you once avoided and love them back to wholeness. It's in solitude that forgiveness grows roots, not for others, but for yourself. When no one else is around to distract you, your wounds start talking, but so does your wisdom. Solitude forces a conversation between your pain and your purpose. You start forgiving yourself for what you didn't know and blessing the lessons that broke you open. Healing doesn't happen in the crowd, it happens when you face the echo of your own heart and decide to love it anyway. Number seven, creative power. Silence is the birthplace of creation. When you're not performing, you're inventing. You start hearing new ideas, seeing visions, feeling inspired. The stillness becomes a blank canvas where God paints through it. Every moment, every great moment, every divine idea started in the quiet. That's why creative power flows strongest through those who's mastered being alone. God speaks through stillness. The world's greatest ideas are born in rooms where no one claps. When you're not distracted by comparison, you tapped into creation, pure, undiluted, and divine. Solitude turns into your personal genius, where something new is always being made. Number 8, detachment from illusion. Once you found peace in solitude, manipulation loses its grip. You stop falling for counterfeit love, false validation, and hollow success. You see through performance because you've learned authenticity in private. Freedom begins where illusion ends. When you've tasted peace, chaos loses its flavor. You stop falling for fake love, hollow praise, and shallow success. You start seeing through performance in people, in systems, even yourself. Solitude shows you what's real because there's nothing left to pretend for. And once you've known that kind of authenticity, illusion can't seduce you again. Number 9, divine communication. Prayer is when you talk to God. Solitude is when you hear Him. You start noticing patterns, repeated numbers, timing, conversations that feel orchestrated. You realize nothing is random. People who spend time alone walk guided because they've learned how to recognize the sound of God's guidance in everyday life. Those who walk alone often walk closer to God. They don't just pray, they commune. They recognize patterns, confirmations, and timing as divine dialogue. They live guided, not guessing. And number 10, fearlessness. Alone no longer feels like abandonment, it feels like ascension. You stop fearing endings because you've seen yourself survive silence. People who are comfortable being alone don't beg to belong, they build from within. They know that everything they lost in the crowd, God restores in quiet. Once you survived yourself, nothing outside of you can scare you. You faced your thoughts, your silence, your pain, and you're still standing. You stop begging for belonging and start building your own peace. Aloneness stops being empty, it becomes sacred. And when you walk from that place, your spirit carries authority, and that's real power. Fearlessness born from faith. The world calls it loneliness. God calls it preparation. When you're comfortable being alone, you're never really by yourself. You're surrounded by divine company. Your spirit is learning to walk in clarity, calm, and calling. And that's not isolation, that's initiation. So when you see someone who's calm in isolation, don't mistake it for sadness. That's someone who's done the inner work, someone who's fought their own shadow and won. Solitude isn't their weakness, it's their superpower. Because once you find home in yourself, every other space becomes optional. Thank you for visiting my channel. See you on the next one. You can always tell someone who's met God. They move different. Not louder, not busier, but different. There's a calm that doesn't need to be proven, a peace that doesn't ask permission. Those are the people who are comfortable being alone. Not because they hate people, but because they've learned how to love themselves in the absence of noise. They don't chase rooms, they don't beg for belonging. They've discovered something sacred, that solitude is not a void, it's a meeting place between the soul and the spirit. See, loneliness is when you crave presence. Aloneness is when you carry it. Loneliness says, someone complete me. Aloneness says, I met completion in silence. Most people never make that shift. They confuse attention with connection, presence with purpose. But the people who have learned to sit in silence without losing their minds, they've crossed the threshold. Because once you find peace alone, you stop bargaining for your soul for company. That's why the alone ones don't panic when people leave. They recognize it as divine pruning. God removes who can't go where you're headed, and solitude becomes your training ground. There's a reason every calling begins with separation. Moses had the wilderness, David had the field, Jesus had the desert, and you've got your silence. It's not rejection, it's refinement. When God isolates you, He's not subtracting, He's stabilizing. He's pulling you away from distraction so you can hear the blueprint clearly. Because too many voices speak over your destiny, you forget what your own spirit sounds like. Solitude clears the frequency. That's where you learn how to move by instinct, not insecurity. That's where you learn how to wait on divine timing instead of forcing outcomes. That's where you finally meet the version of you that doesn't need saving, just remembering. Being alone forces you to meet every part of yourself you've been avoiding. That the part that still hurt, the parts that still blame, the parts that don't trust love anymore. It's all there, waiting for acknowledgement. And in the sacred quiet, you stop performing healing and start living it. You stop pretending you're over things that still ache. And God says, now we can begin. That's why solitude burns. It's a refining fire. It melts away the false identities you built to survive. It strips the ego. It exposes the lie that you needed to be needed. You start realizing maybe I wasn't abandoned. Maybe I was rescued. Maybe isolation was protection disguised as pain. And once that revelation hits, something shifts. You stop fearing endings because you realize solitude was never empty, it was full of God. In that stillness, the spiritual senses come alive. You start hearing beyond sound, feeling beyond touch, knowing beyond logic. You recognize energy, you discern motives, you sense timing. You become still enough to feel God breathing through your thoughts. That's why people who are comfortable being alone move different. They're not reactive, they're responsive. They don't chase closure, they create it. They don't fight for attention, they attract alignment. Their solitude turned into strategy. Their silence became strength, and their isolation became their anointing. When those who are comfortable being alone re enter the world, they do so with a healed kind of power. They don't compete, they contribute. They don't try to prove their worth, they embody it. They move like someone who has already been chosen because solitude taught them that they were never forgotten. And you can feel it. There's something magnetic about someone who's been alone and made peace with it. They don't need to convince you, their energy already speaks. They've learned the secret. The one who walks with God is never truly alone. If you're in a season of isolation right now, don't rush out of it. Stay there until you see what it's showing you. The silence isn't punishing you, it's preparing you. God is teaching you to hear Him without noise, to trust Him without proof, and to love yourself without performance. When you finally make peace with solitude, you stop calling it lonely and you'll start calling it holy. Because it's in the alone moments that heaven whispers. Now that I have your full attention, let's begin. See you on the next one.